wrong, and this is, this is not how we should behave. And he became a non-violent person and
What period?
very compassionate.
What period was it?
Oh, now you got me. It was, I think, 2,000 years ago. I'm not very sure about the date. But yeah, this grandfather used to always say that non-violence is as old as the hills. It's nothing new that he has brought out. What he's taken is from history, he's taken this philosophy and refined it and made it applicable to his time. And that is what he expected. And that's why he called his life My Experiments with Truth. And he transformed the name of his philosophy as the pursuit of truth. He called it Satyagraha. Now when he was first influenced by Thoreau, and Thoreau's book of Civil Disobedience, he read that book in the prison in South Africa, and he felt very encouraged that a great person like him had the same ideas as he was practicing in South Africa. And so he adopted civil disobedience as a term to use to describe his movement in South Africa. And after some time, when he began to think about it, he said, there's nothing disobedient about wanting justice. So why should I call it civil disobedience? And he then accepted passive resistance from Tolstoy. So after that South African period, he started calling his movement for a while as passive resistance. And then he came to the conclusion that there is nothing passive about wanting justice. And so he said, now I have to find a new name for it. And he launched a campaign. He invited people to enter a competition and suggest a name. And they eventually came up with Satyagraha, which translates to mean pursuit of truth. And he said, this is perfect, because that is what life is, that we should be constantly pursuing the truth. And so he called his philosophy the pursuit of truth, and his life became a pursuit of truth.
I'm wondering about...
But everybody else. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us to learn. We need to get out of our narrow thinking to broaden our perspectives and create a human family. One of the things that my grandfather always talked about is that we need to learn to build relationships. Today we build relationships on self-interest. We are always thinking about selfishly motivated. If we are not going to gain anything from this relationship, why should I bother to have a relationship? And so we keep breaking up relationships because we can't get anything out of them. And he said ideal relationships are built on the 4 principles of respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. We have to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation. We live in a myth that we are independent individuals and we can do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. We are not independent individuals. We are interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated. Not only as human beings, but with all of creation. So it's only when we respect that we will understand who we are and what we are and why are we here on earth. We are not here by accident. We are all here for a purpose. And at the very least, our purpose, individually, our purpose is to make this world a little better than we had found it by our presence. And when we understand that, then we will be able to accept each other as human beings and not identify people by labels. Today we identify people by labels. We have so many labels on a person. We have religious labels, economic labels, social labels, political labels, and gender labels. You name it and we have a label. And we identify people by those labels. He said we've got to remove all those labels and begin to look at each other as human beings. We are here for a common purpose. What we believe in, what we respect is our personal choice. It should not reflect on our social relationship. So it's only when we accept that, when we accept each other as human beings, that we will be able to appreciate our own humanity.
With the Second World War, Nazism and the death camps, would you spend some time with that, thinking the fact that there are certain things like the nuclear weapons are to be destroyed, and to take property only, or to not be concerned with property, such as the so-called plowshare actions. There's some property that is improperty. Would you spend maybe a few moments with your thoughts, or what would your grandfather have done if he had been in Germany in the 1940s?
Well, when this whole thing came up and when Hitler's actions became public, he wrote a letter to Hitler and appealed to the goodness in him to stop this madness and to stop taking the world into a war. He said, you can stop it if you, and he wrote a very polite and very respectful letter to him. But that letter, the British censored it.
That what?
The British government censored the letter. They didn't deliver it. So we don't know what effect that would have had on him. But the one fact that we do have to consider and remember, that what is happening today in our societies and what has been happening historically, like Hitler and all of these things that have gone on in our society, is the cumulative effect of the way of life that we have adopted. And the way of life we have adopted is so selfish, so greedy, so materialistic, that we are always exploiting each other to gain whatever we want. Individually, we are exploiting people because I want something from you and I want to take it by whatever means possible. We do that by nations too. Every nation has a foreign policy based on what is good for their nation. So every nation is exploiting every other nation in the world for what they want. And when that exploitation gets to a point when it hurts people, then you have all this evils of war and so on going on. So we have to take a look at our lifestyle and make changes there so that we don't exploit people, we don't live in greed, we live in compassion and respect and love for all of us. You know, one thing that, this is a very radical thought, and I think that this whole concept of nationalism and patriotism is the worst thing that could have happened to any human. Because it's made us believe that we can be patriotic to our corner of the world and we don't have to care about anybody else. And we are proud Americans and we are proud of our existence and we don't care about anybody else. nobody can mess around with us and so on. And so we have that power and that whole narrow concept. But we forget the fact that there is no country in the world can live on its own. That if the rest of the world is going down the drain, we are going down with them. However powerful we may be and how many nuclear weapons we may have in our possessions, it's not going to help us survive if the rest of the world is going down the drain. And it is going down the drain when half of the world is living in such abject poverty that they don't know how to survive on it. So the security and stability of any country in the world depends on the security and stability of the whole world. And unless we start working and doing things, not just what is good for ourselves, but what is good for the world, we are not going to be able to save our world. So we've got to change that attitude and habit. And that's when we will be able to stop all this kind of madness that happens with Hitlers and all the other, even later. Now we still have people who are massacring and killing children and killing people.
What do you think your grandfather would have done in regard to death camps and etc.?
He was very disturbed by all that. He didn't like it. He wanted all that to stop, and he wanted people to change their attitudes. I mean, he was working in India at the time, and so he didn't have that power to expand his ideas internationally, but he expected that everybody internationally opposed to this kind of thing would stand up and do something to change. But we generally, one of the famous words that come to my mind, I don't know who said them, but they're really very effective. And he said, the greatest sinners of this time are not the few who destroyed, but the vast number of us who sat back and did nothing.
There's a word I ran across, I think it was in a dictionary, something like the Dictionary of Peace about 3 years ago, and it was called humanitarian. And it's a replacement term for patriotism, in that your allegiance is to humanity rather than to your nation. So I found that to be a kind of a discovery word, that I'm a humanitarian. What I wanted to say, I've said before a couple of times, but I haven't dwelt on it a lot. It's about the expression by our presence. I think you said at some point to leave a better world by our presence. And I just have this like experiential experiment that I run in my mind that I'll share with you, and that's that people don't face each other really very well. I mean, face to face. And so the experiment is kind of when you're facing somebody, maybe it's your spouse especially, that you face them and not just to deal with an issue, but you face them with a very deep level of acceptance to the point where they see love in your face. And I really think that a lot of people don't have many seconds or minutes where they feel a very deep acceptance and see love in somebody else's face. And I think it can be I don't know, maybe we're more ready to cry because of the condition of the world than we are to believe that the love of another person and that we can give or that we can receive is a really powerful, ready grace, by our presence. So that's kind of my we say an experiment and experience that we really ought to be able to come up with that type of gift to people, a very high level of acceptance that transitions to not just acceptance but a deep love. And so the second thing, though, is there's a book I brought outside, and I was impressed by this guy's practicalities by Reverend Silvoso, who's a transformational evangelist. And the book is called Ecclesia, and it's about people sharing, going into the marketplace and trying to unite people on the basis of that people have a mind and a lot of talent, and that if you really just try to share that talent widely, that people are fed and people are taken care of. If you really go out and as a church, but as really in the marketplace of need, and you really just, you go to need and to try to share into the need. And he said that 5% of people are visionaries. I mean, his experience, this guy's 70s plus, I think, but his experience in trying to transform the world by taking the need of marketplace and facing it, is that 5% of people are visionaries, and then there's about, and so they speak that, and people realize they're a visionary, but only 15% of the people will be early adopters, that they'll see it as a vision and they'll say, gee, let's take this down the road and step along with it. And then the other 80%, the people that actually will follow on, they're late adopters, or they're only going to be co-opted by the vision if they see that it's already got some critical mass and the vision's being maintained, and that it's probably going to survive for a while.
Well, because of the kind of lifestyle that we have, which is greedy, based on materialism, we even practice this at home when we tell our children that they have to be successful in life, and success always means richness, materialism. You know, they have to make more money. So success is defined as material, and it's because of that kind of lifestyle that we have a situation where a few people are visionaries and a large part of us sit back and we just follow because we don't want to disturb anything. So we choose to become like sheep, and we depend on the shepherd to take us to greener pastures, but often the shepherd takes us to the slaughterhouse. And then by then it's too late and to do anything. So we should not be sheep. We should be people thinking and doing the right thing, and we should not be led by a minority of people. This is not part of civilization, it's not part of life. It has become a part of life now because we have chosen a materialistic, greedy lifestyle. So, you know, that's what I keep saying, that we have to look at all aspects of our life and begin to change that. It's only then that we can really have a really civilized life where we won't be fighting and killing each other to protect what we have, but we will share what we have with all of the people.
Unfortunately, we're
One woman's voice.
one woman's voice.
After a lot of male
There were a
voices.
lot of male voices. Okay.
The proceedings with the memorial by saying, from now on, there's one woman and then there's one man speaking on behalf of Phil. So here's the one woman speaking on behalf of Kasturbai, who was Mahatma Gandhi's wife. And it was something for me to discover years ago that Kasturbai was such an enormous figure in Gandhi's life. So much so that Gandhi said that he learned nonviolence from his wife. And the reasons that she said that, which we have discussed with Arun from time to time, is that she put up with his stupidity, he said. And that she constantly would, in the most nonviolent way, which I wasn't there to experience, but maybe Arun was, would point out how stupid he was with some of the ways that he decided to do things within the community and without. Well, I talked about this at a presentation that Braden and I gave on Gandhi's life to mostly, well, it was a mixed group, but a lot of women in the group were from Latin American oppressed countries. And I talked about the need for women to find their voice, because Kasturbai had a voice. And many of us in the peace movement know that the peace movement itself has been too male-dominated, too many male voices, too many male leaders, and that women have to find their voice as Kasturbai found hers. And one of the women from Colombia started crying, and she raised her hand and she said, "I don't have a voice. I feel," what did she say? I'm hiding. I'm in hiding, even though I'm a United States citizen. I haven't found my voice, and maybe I need to find my woman's voice. And we then talked in the larger group about women needing to be voices of leadership in all movements, and that just as much as we need the racial we need to address the racial dynamics that are so skewed in favor of white supremacy, we need to address the need for women's voices to be lifted and raised in the peace movement. And I wonder, Arun, if you want to say anything about Kasturbai and your grandfather.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for bringing it up. In fact, you know, my grandmother was uneducated. She had never gone to school. She couldn't read or write, but she was a very practical woman, very wise. And grandfather, when he said that he learned nonviolence from her, it happened when they were both 16 years old. As you probably know, if you read his biography, autobiography, they were married at the age of 13. Both of them were 13 years old. But they started living together at the age of 16. And at that age, grandfather said he didn't know who was going to be the boss in the relationship. And so he went to the library and found books. And all those books were written by male chauvinists, because they all talked about how the husband should lay down the rules and enforce them strictly. So after reading this, he came home one evening and he told grandmother that from tomorrow you're not going to go out of the house without my permission. That is the law and you're going to obey it, and I want no arguments. And she didn't say anything or retort. She just quietly went to bed, got up the next day, and she continued to do what she always did, went out and visited, and never bothered to get his permission. A few days later, when he realized that she was not obeying him, he confronted her again and he said, "How dare you disobey me? Didn't I tell you that you are not to stir out of the house without my permission?" And at that point, very quietly, without raising her voice or making a scene, grandmother said to him, he said, "I was brought up to believe that we must always obey the elders in the house. And I believe the elders in this house are your parents. If you are trying to tell me that I should not obey your mother but obey you instead, let me know so that I can go and tell your mother I'm not going to obey you anymore." And of course he couldn't tell her to do that, and so the whole matter was settled without anybody raising a voice, making a scene. And he said that that was the most profound lesson in nonviolent conflict resolution that he learned from her at that age. But later on in his life, he also said, when you brought up the question of women, that nobody can oppress us more than we oppress ourselves. When we accept somebody's oppression and injustice, then we are as much guilty as they are. So we have to get up and make our voices heard.
Well, as all of you know, one of the Catholic worker traditions is clarification of thought, or sometimes mystification of thought. And Aaron, we thank you so much, because in the last 2 hours you have presented a vision of nonviolence which in so many ways is so much in consonance with the Catholic worker, but also raises challenges that allows us to clarify thought. And so we just really, really appreciate your sharing with us.
Thank you.
And a couple of announcements. To move from